So it is 9:30 on Sunday morning, and we're at Santa Cruz Community Church. I'm John Heberling, retired pastor and Bible teacher, and we finished our study of Genesis. But the Bible is all one story, and if Moses indeed wrote all of these 5 books, you can see Genesis is really an introduction to what Moses is primarily writing, which is Exodus through Deuteronomy. So we can't really, the story doesn't end in a coffin in Egypt. The last line of Genesis is Joseph was placed in a coffin in Egypt. That's just the beginning. Then the story goes on. So last week, my son was teaching, and you folks that are watching it on YouTube didn't get that one because it wasn't recorded. But anyway, you looked at the first chapter of Exodus that kind of links back to Genesis, that starts out listing the people who went into Egypt, and then records that they multiplied rapidly in Egypt. They became from just a family, a clan, now they became a full nation. They grew, and then there, King James, there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Pharaoh who, this may have meant a change of dynasty. Many believe that it actually was a change of dynasty. And it was kind of an idea that we're returning to things that are really Egyptian, and that doesn't include Moses. So or doesn't include Joseph. So this Pharaoh now begins the slavery of the people, and then further he's concerned that they're a foreign presence in his country. And if they were attacked, they would be attacked by people who were more like the Hebrews than like the Egyptians. They would be attacked by people from Mesopotamia. That was their primary enemy at this time. And the Pharaoh is afraid that the Israelites, the Hebrews, would side with the invaders, and this would be very disastrous for the Egyptians. So first he orders the midwives, and it only mentions 2 midwives, but I presume they were the chief midwives over the whole group of midwives, that when they are helping in the birth of a Hebrew baby, if it's a boy, the midwife is supposed to kill it. If it's a girl, you can let it live. But the midwives didn't do that. It specifically says that they feared God, so they didn't do that. So Pharaoh then calls them and says, why didn't you do that? And their answer was that the Hebrew women, unlike the Egyptian women, delivered their babies very quickly, and by the time the midwife got there, the baby was already delivered. So the next thing the Pharaoh says then is, well, we're going to kill the boy babies. We are going to gather up the boy babies and kill them. There's in the Old Testament, there's always kind of foreshadows of things in the New. And the idea that Herod had ordered the babies around, the boy babies around Bethlehem killed to try to get rid of this Messiah that the Magi told him had been born. So there's kind of a feel of connection here. But anyway, now then we get to the second chapter, and we start actually Moses' own story. So it talks about a marriage between a man of the tribe of Levi and a woman of the tribe of Levi. Later we will identify them by name as Amram is the father, and Jochebed, I think, is the mother. Anyway, now I'm not sure whether, I looked more carefully at this, whether I'm supposing that Aaron is the older brother of Moses, and that maybe Aaron was born before this strict kill the boy babies order came into effect. But by the time Moses is born, and this, I think, is probably one of the most familiar stories in the Old Testament. If you have Bible stories for children, there's always this story because it's so charming, it's so wondrous. So Moses is born, and I want to introduce an idea here that I was trying to trace down. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. Hiding a baby boy for 3 months is a pretty difficult thing to do, but she did. But then the baby is becoming more noisy, more in need of care that she can't provide and still hide him. So now, the idea I want to suggest, and there's kind of a footnote in one of the other places where this story is told, I think in the New Testament, that suggests that this wording, that she saw that he was a fine child, actually meant that he was a very unusual baby, to the extent that she believed that God had his hand on this baby. I don't find that difficult to believe, because the whole story unfolds in a way that you think long before God calls Moses specifically for his task, that God was preparing him for that task. So after 3 months, then she decides that she can't hide the baby any longer. So this is this charming story. She takes this woven basket, woven out of the reeds along the Nile, and she covers it with pitch, with tar, so it will float. She puts the baby in it, puts the basket in the reeds along the river. Now, I know from way back when I was reading the story, I thought, and how does she think this is going to save her baby? Well, I think maybe she had a plan in mind, and it's the plan that actually happened. And if she didn't, God did. So I think the charming and interesting thing about it is that she has the older daughter, Miriam, who plays into the story later. So Miriam, I would guess, would be a young teenage girl, maybe at this time, that she sends to Miriam to watch over the basket and see what happens. So Miriam is sort of a distance away, but she's watching to see what happens. Then the Pharaoh's daughter comes. Does Moses' mother know the Pharaoh's daughter comes regularly right along this place to bathe in the river with all of her entourage of her servants? And they see this basket, and the Pharaoh's daughter is curious about it, so she sends one of her maids to wade out there and get the basket. Evidently, it's not a very deep, it's backwater of the river where the reeds are. And the girl brings the basket, they open it up, and there's the baby. And the baby is crying. And so somebody, either the princess herself or one of her servants, says, well, it's a Hebrew baby. But anyway, the Pharaoh's daughter, who I don't know whether she is married, has ever been married, but the motherhood within her appeals to this baby, and maybe it is a very unusual baby. So then the Miriam comes running and says, would you like me to get a Hebrew nurse to take care of this baby? The baby needs to be fed by milk. And the Pharaoh says, yeah, that's a good idea, Pharaoh's daughter says. So she runs and gets Moses' own mother, her mother, brings her, and the Pharaoh's daughter says, take care of this baby for me, so and I'll pay you. That's interesting. So the mother takes young Moses home and nurses him and continues to raise him. But when he's, I don't know at what stage, whether just when he's weaned or when he's a young teenager, at some point along the Pharaoh's daughter has given her this baby to raise for the Pharaoh's daughter. So she takes the baby, and I see God's hand in this, and gives the baby to Pharaoh's daughter, who sort of adopts him. And apparently it's Pharaoh's daughter who names him Moses. Now, when the text says, or the footnotes say that this name means so-and-so, it's much more sound-alike things. There's a word either in Hebrew or in Egyptian that means to draw out. And this word sounds like the name Moses. So she names him Moses because she drew him out of the water. Now, then Moses is adopted and becomes the, quote, Prince of Egypt. There's a film that we saw that's a very good cartoon depiction of this, the Prince of Egypt. And he's raised just like he was an Egyptian son in the Pharaoh's family. He's taught all of the things that the Egyptian higher class people are taught. And he apparently stays in the palace learning these things for close to 40 years. But when he is fully mature and aware of what's going on, he realizes that he is a Hebrew and that the Hebrew people are the slave people of Egypt. So it says he went out to see his own people. I need to put on my reading glasses because I cannot read with these glasses on. And last week when I was trying to preach, I couldn't even read with the reading glasses on. So when Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. So Moses is touched with the fact that he really is a Hebrew. He's one of these slave people, and the slave people are being very hard worked and mistreated. Then he sees an Egyptian who's probably one of those slave masters who are put over these people, who's beating a Hebrew. Why? We're not told, but probably because he wasn't working hard enough or fast enough. So the Egyptian is beating this Hebrew, and it says one of his own people. Glancing this way and that, he doesn't want to be seen fighting in behalf of his own people because that would be difficult to explain. So glancing this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian. Now, did he carry a sword? He might have. Whatever he did, he killed the Egyptian and hid the body in the sand. Apparently that wasn't too difficult to do. Sand, you could dig in the sand. And he then thought, well, okay, he struck a blow for his own people, killing one guy who was mistreating them. But the next day he went out again to see his people, and he sees two Hebrews fighting with each other, I guess really fighting hard. And so he attempts to intercede. He says, why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew? One of them obviously is the bigger man, the bully of this. And it's that man that he's addressing. And the man said, who made you ruler and judge over us? Now, if you're interested in the story of the Old Testament, in the New Testament, there's quite a nice storytelling of it. When the persecution began of the Jews who believed in Jesus, Stephen, who was one of the leaders, is kind of arrested for being a leader of the Jesus believers, and is taken before the Sanhedrin. And before the Sanhedrin, he's allowed to make a defense of who he is and what he believes. And so wisely, he begins by telling the story of the Hebrew people. And he tells the story of Moses. And he says that he emphasizes this line, that whereas his own people said, "Who made you a ruler over us?" And from that, being a good preacher, he leaps into the idea that now the true ruler of the people, the Son of God, has come among them, and they have treated him worse than, or at least as badly as the early people mistreated Moses. So he makes this connection between Moses and Jesus, a connection that is made by Peter in his preaching when he says that Moses said toward the end of Deuteronomy that God would raise up a prophet like himself, and the people should follow that prophet. And this is considered to be a direct prophecy of the Messiah. So, when Moses confronts these two who are fighting, the one who was doing the fighting, beating up on the other, says, "Who are you who made you a ruler and a judge of us? Are you going to kill me? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" So now he realizes that what he did was seen and is being talked about, and it's going to get back to Pharaoh. So then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." Now, sometimes in the telling of the story, it seems that he actually heard, it said that Pharaoh gave orders that Moses was to be killed. But anyway, in the story here in Exodus, he knows that he's in trouble. So he flees, and he's 40 years old when this happens. So he leaves Egypt. He goes out across the desert, out into the desert. No, it says in verse 15, when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. So Moses may have heard that they were actually looking for him. Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian. Midian is named after the tribe of people who lived there, the Midianites. And they are also descendants of Abraham in a roundabout way, and also believers in the true God. So now, this sounds so similar to the stories of seeking a wife for Isaac and Jacob seeking help that Moses sat down by the well, and people were coming, shepherds were coming and watering their sheep, and here came these women who were bringing their sheep, and they were daughters of a priest of Midian, who we'll find out really believes in the true God. So 7 daughters of this priest, and they came to water their sheep, fill the troughs with water. The shepherds came and drove them away. I guess the shepherds felt like, well, these are only girls tending these sheep, and we will water our sheep first. And so they drove them away. But Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock, very like the watering of the sheep and the camels there at the well that we read about in Genesis. Now the girls returned to Reuel, their father, who's also called Jethro later, and he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" Apparently every day the men shepherds would drive them away, and it would be late then when everybody else was done watering the sheep that they would come back. They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds." Now, Moses, I'm sure, dressed like an Egyptian. He had his hair and the style and beard in the style of an Egyptian. So he looked like an Egyptian to them. Perhaps he spoke to them in an Egyptian language. He even drew water for us and watered the flock. And the father said, well, where is he? Why didn't you invite him home to have something to eat? Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat. So when Moses comes in then, Jethro sees, he has only daughters apparently, only these 7 daughters. Sees this big, strong, good-looking guy, and it's kind of like Laban and Jacob. He makes an arrangement for Moses to stay and become part of his household and be the chief shepherd of his sheep. And so to seal this arrangement that Moses is part of the household, he gives him his daughter Zipporah in marriage. Then Moses has a son whom he names Gershom, and we're told in the footnote that Gershom sounds like a word, I don't know whether in Hebrew or in Egyptian, but a word that means alien, somebody who's not in their own place. So he says, I have become an alien in a foreign land, and so he names his son an alien. Now, he stays there, and he's 40 years old, but that's not old in that day where he's going to live to be 120. And meanwhile, back in Egypt, the slaves are still in very bad condition. It's never very clear in all of this how much of the worship and understanding of the one true God remained with these Hebrews who had been in Egypt now for generations and grown to be a nation. But God, we're told clearly, hears their groanings. He's following this. He had told Abraham that his people would be in a foreign land for 400 years, and that God is seeing it's the time to rescue his people. So God remembers his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. The 3 patriarchs are going to be mentioned over and over again as a trio of those with whom God made the original covenant. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. But he doesn't, do something dramatic to rescue them. Instead, he calls Moses to rescue them. Moses is tending the flock, and this land is kind of semi-arid, but there are places where there's grass. So a good shepherd finds these places where there's grass, and it takes them further and further away from their home place. So Moses is out tending the flock of Jethro. See, now he's called Reuel, before he's called Jethro now, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the far side of the desert, way far away from their home place, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Now, I don't know whether the people there considered Sinai, Horeb, a sacred mountain before this, or whether now Moses is writing this, and he's realizing that this is a sacred mountain because that's the mountain on which God gives the law and the covenants to his people. So anyway, as he's going about his shepherding work, he's now older. His life is divided into 3 40-year sections, so he's past 40 at this point. He sees a bush that's burning now, it'd be, I guess, unusual for a bush to be burning anyway, perhaps struck by lightning. But the bush is burning, but it just keeps burning. You'd think the bush would burn up and it would go out, but it just keeps burning. So Moses says, well, that's odd. I think I'll go take a closer look at this. But there's an angel, the angel of the Lord. Now, when the text says the angel of the Lord, we realize that this is really a way of saying that God is communicating. But the eternal God is not himself present only in this place. He still inhabits the entire universe. But he is present in this place because he has sent an angel to speak for him. So Moses is watching this bush burn, and the voice of God comes out of the bush. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, he called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses, like so many in the Old Testament, says, here am I. I guess that's the right way you answer when somebody calls you. Here am I hear you. I'm here. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Now, it's holy ground because God is there. Whether it's holy ground in a more long-range sense, I'm not sure. But it's apparently on the shoulder of Mount Sinai, so it may be that the whole mountain is considered holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. Now, it's interesting when they're arguing with Jesus about the afterlife, and the Sadducees are saying there is no afterlife. The Old Testament, the first 5 books, which they were considered all that was inspired, do not establish that there's an afterlife. Jesus says, God did not say, I was the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He said, I am the God of Isaac and Jacob. So Jesus says to the Sadducees, God is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So the patriarchs, he says, are alive beyond death. So anyway, at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. There always is, it's mentioned a number of times, this idea that if God appeared and you looked at him, you would die. So Moses, this is God speaking to him, so he's afraid to look directly at it. And anyway, Moses is pretty timid about all this anyway. Do not come any closer, God said. So he has reason to be a little fearful of this close proximity to God. I have indeed seen the misery of my people. Now, you see, verse 7 says, the Lord said, and the word Lord is all in capital letters. So that means that already as Moses is writing this, and on through Genesis, whenever you see the word Lord all in capital letters, it represents this personal name of God that we're going to talk about here in a minute. So God says, I have heard their cry, them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the land of Egypt and bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land. Now here's this phrase that we hear over and again, a land flowing with milk and honey, which simply is a way of describing a very lush land. It has flowers and bees, and they make honey. It's a land for grazing cattle and goats that give milk. So it's a land flowing with milk and honey. Doesn't mean that there's actually liquid milk and liquid honey on the surface of the ground. Okay, it's the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. We in Bible college used to talk about the Ims and the Ites. These are all the Ims and the Ites. And they're the same people that were recognized in Genesis. Mainly the Hittites were mentioned. They were the people that Abraham was friendly with and bargaining with. The Jebusites are the ones who lived in Jerusalem. But these are the people, Canaanites. If you trace this down from Noah, the Canaanites are one group of peoples who inhabited this area. Therefore, it's called the land of Canaan. But they weren't the only ones who lived there. The Hittites came down from what we would now think of as Europe and invaded this area. And they were very strong in control of the area that is now the nation of Turkey. But their people came down from there and found good land and lived in Canaan. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now, go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said, who am I? Why me, in effect? I'm just a shepherd here. I'm a stranger and an alien here, and I'm a criminal in Egypt. So who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? God says, I will be with you. That's God's answer. I can't do this. God says, I will be with you. And if I am with you, then you can do it. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Now that, if you look at the map, you can see that really the mountain is not really on the way from Egypt. I mean, the closest way would be to go right up from the mouth of the Nile and around the coast, and then you'd be right there. But that's where these strong people lived, and God knew that wasn't going to happen. So the sign to Moses was that when they left Egypt, they would end up at this mountain, and they would worship God there. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me, and they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? I gather that the name of a god in Egypt was very significant. They had their supposed gods that all had a name. And this God of the Hebrews at various times is referred to as the God who doesn't have a name and who you can't see. So what is his name, they will say. God said to Moses, I am who I am. That is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent you. And now you've got the footnote that says, I am in Hebrew is very like this name that the King James translates as Jehovah, and later translations say no, that's the J sound is not in these early languages, so it wouldn't be Jehovah, it'd be Yahweh, and it's actually represented in ancient Hebrew by 4 consonants. And the vowels then are put in later so you can pronounce it. But the original word is called the tetragrammaton, which means the 4 letters. So you tell them that I am, the great I am, has sent you. We see it that way. God said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, now you notice all capital letters, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, he has sent me to you. Now, it almost seems like this is the first time God is telling anybody that name, and yet, if Moses wrote Genesis, all through Genesis, that name appears. So, this is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. And if you don't understand that, ask your local Jehovah's Witnesses when they come to your door. They'll explain to you that the name Jehovah is always the name that we should use, in spite of the fact that the name appears nowhere in the New Testament. So only place it appears is when it's quoting an Old Testament text. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I promise to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us make a 3-day journey. This is kind of interesting, that the first proposal they make to Pharaoh is that they be allowed to go outside of Egypt where they can worship their God. Just a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to Yahweh our God. But I know, God tells Moses, I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. And God is planning to compel him with a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he will let you go. References to God's as if he were a human being are interesting all through the Old Testament. And it's more the Mormons that talk about God has a body like ours, and we will be gods when we're in heaven with a body like his. So they say, well, see, God has hands and arms and a face. And I say, and wings. And they say, wait a minute. Yeah, there are texts that talk about God having them under his wings. I said, you don't have any wings. I don't have any wings. So anyway, and I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that they will give you, that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house, that is Egyptian women, for articles of silver and gold. The Hebrew women were obviously household servants of the Egyptians. And for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters. And so you will plunder the Egyptians. The Egyptians will pay you for your services. So Moses says, what if they don't believe me or listen to me and say, the Lord has not appeared to you? Moses is trying to get out of this assignment. He knows enough about Pharaoh, and now this isn't the same Pharaoh, but he knows enough about the way the Egyptians are that he doesn't want to do this. The Lord said, what's in your hand? You heard this sermon? I've preached this sermon. What is that in your hand? And Moses says, oh, it's just a staff. It's just a stick. Shepherds carry this staff to move the sheep around and to fight off any animal that came. It's a staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake. I don't think Moses likes snakes any more than any of us. And this is a big staff, so it probably became a big snake. And he ran from it. Then the Lord said, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. Really, God? Take the snake by the tail. Yeah, that's what I said. Reach out and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took a hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then he gives him a second sign. He says, put your hand inside your cloak. And he does. And bring it out. When he brings it out, his hand is leprous. It's white. It's not a normal color. It's decaying. Then he says, put it back in and bring it back out, and now the hand is normal. It says, so you can show these experiences to the Israelites and they will believe. If they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, then they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these two signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. So immediately God is saying, I'm going to do miraculous things that will impress the Egyptians. Moses said to the Lord, "Oh Lord, I've never been eloquent." We have the tradition that Moses stuttered, that he didn't really have clear speech. "I've never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you've spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue." The Lord said to him, "Who gave man his mouth?" This kind of conversation with God makes sense to us. "Who makes you deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Don't tell me you can't talk, because I'm the one who makes people able to talk. Now go, I will help you to speak and will teach you what to say." Whatever impediment or problem Moses had or thought he had, he becomes a great spokesman. The whole book of Deuteronomy is Moses preaching, as we would say, telling the story over to the next generation. Moses said, "Oh Lord, please send someone else to do it." I understand, Moses. I don't want to do this. Send somebody else. But you see, at this point, we can see that, no, God had prepared Moses, this whole thing of him fleeing and spending time out there as a shepherd and then going back. This was all God's plan. Everything that happened to Moses, being raised in the palace, leaving this, then it all was God's doing. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses. God's very patient, but his patience is not untestable, untriable. That he says, "Come on, Moses, you know I can do this. Just quit trying to get out of it." So the Lord compromises somewhat with Moses. He says, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well, and he's already on his way to meet you." Now that's interesting, because later we find out that Aaron, for some reason, decided to find his brother Moses out there among where he fled. And he does go to meet him and meets him on the mountain. And they make this bond that lasts until both of them die in the Lord's service. Aaron becomes the high priest and Moses becomes the leader. He's already on his way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you. It will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. He gives Moses a really high calling. "But take this staff in your hand so that you can perform miraculous signs with it." That staff seems to be, when they're crossing the sea, Moses holds out the staff. When they're having a battle with the people that they encounter, Moses holds up his arms and his staff. So this staff becomes very symbolic of Moses' authority and his ability to do God's work. Then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Let me go back to my own people." See, he's part of the family, and Jethro is the patriarch of the family, so he needs permission. "Let me go back to my own people to see if any of them are still alive." That's interesting. He's still alive, but he tells Jethro, "I don't even know if they're still alive. Go, and I wish you well." Now, the Lord, Yahweh, had said to Moses in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead." The Pharaoh that put out the order that you should be killed and the people that he gave the order to are all gone now. Again, Matthew, in writing his gospel, sees some connection here. He sees that when Herod attempts to kill Jesus by killing the babies, Joseph is told to take Mary and the baby and go to Egypt. And then he stays in Egypt till an angel comes to Joseph and says, those who were trying to kill the baby are now dead, Herod and those he gave orders to. So go back. So there's a kind of a connection here, a kind of a foreshadowing. So Moses took his wife and sons, he has 2 sons, put them on a donkey and started back to Egypt. He took the staff of God in his hand. The Lord said to Moses, "When you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son. And I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son." God is already telling Moses how this is going to end up, but we have to go through the various plagues, we call them, before they finally kill the firstborn son, and that is the reason that the Pharaoh and his people send the Hebrews away. At a lodging place on the way, the Lord met Moses. Now again, I presume this is in the form of this angel, it's the go-between, and was about to kill him. What? But Zipporah took a flint knife and cut off her son's foreskins. So Moses had not circumcised his 2 sons. This God set about to kill him. We would say if God wanted to kill Moses, he'd be dead. He didn't really want to kill him. He just wanted to threaten him. And somehow his wife, even though she wasn't a Hebrew, she'd heard the accountings of this somehow, she knew that this was about that covenant of circumcision. So she circumcises the 2 boys. Not a very good thing to be requiring her to do. And she throws the cut off skin at Moses' feet and says, "Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me." So Yahweh left him alone. At that time, the bridegroom of the blood referred to circumcision. Don't hear anything more about that term that I'm aware of, but at that time, that term seemed to resonate with the people. The Lord said to Aaron, now earlier he's told Moses he's already on his way, but now we read that the Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the desert to meet Moses." So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the miraculous gifts he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of Israel, and Aaron, now as Moses is making Aaron the spokesman, Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. Maybe it's more effective for Aaron to tell them what God did to Moses than Moses to tell them himself. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. So immediately now God is calling the people not only out of Egypt but back to himself, and they're responding. Okay, that's as far as we're going to go today. We'll pick it up at chapter 5. We've covered 4 chapters here. at chapter 5, we'll now get into this struggle, this long struggle between God, represented by Moses and Aaron, and Pharaoh, and the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, so that God, I've read that all these plagues are specifically aimed at the warped ideas of God that the Egyptians had, the various things that they thought had to do with deity, that God takes them all down in his plagues, and finally then they release Israel. So, okay, that's the story so far. Do you have some thoughts or questions to wrap this up with this morning? Yes, please.
Did you mention it wasn't the same Pharaoh that was in the household, that he was in the household, or was it a different Pharaoh?
The Pharaoh that originally Moses was raised under dies, apparently of old age, I suppose. And then someone else becomes Pharaoh. Now, probably part of the reason that this is familiar ground is because of the movie, The Ten Commandments. And in the movie, we see that the Pharaoh now that Moses is dealing with was sort of a competing son. That while Moses was considered a son in the palace, adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, there also is a brother whom the Ten Commandments movie names Ramses. I'm sure Jerry dealt with this some last week, that really the timing of this being there are more than one Ramses Pharaoh in Egypt's history, but this being a Ramses Pharaoh is a little questionable, but when Hollywood makes a movie, who's to question? But anyway, the Pharaoh is certainly a descendant of that Pharaoh under whom Moses came to be part of the palace. But he's distinct from that Pharaoh, and he does not treat Moses as someone that he loves as a brother, for sure. So I know that answers your question, but that's about all we can see from the story, is that obviously another Pharaoh would take the place of the Pharaoh who dies. And of course the Egyptians had this belief that in their ideas of eternal life, and that's why they built the pyramids, and that's why they entombed the Pharaoh with tools and with things that he would need in the afterlife, because they did believe in an afterlife. So, okay, so now we've joined the story at the 5th chapter, and the plagues now, we'll touch on them a little bit. We'll not deal with each plague in great detail, but we'll touch on the 10 plagues next time, and the development of this confrontation between the God of the Hebrews and the Egyptian power that really comes to a final thing in the drowning of Pharaoh's army in the Red Sea. And there's a bit of interesting archaeology that there are someplace in Canaan, the archaeologists found a kind of a library of tablets that covered a time when the people of that area were writing to Pharaoh, must be a different Pharaoh later on, and saying that they were being invaded by a people that they called the Heberling. You can see this is very close to the word Hebrew. These Heberling were attacking them, and they wanted Pharaoh to come with his army and rescue them. Obviously, Pharaoh did not come with his army and rescue them, and it's some years, some generations before Pharaoh brings an army into Canaan area again to try to get it under his power. Because at the time of Joshua, Pharaoh seems to want to have nothing more to do with these Hebrew people. Okay, let's close in prayer. We'll have our refreshment visiting time, and then it'll be time for church service. Father, Father, we thank you for your word. Thank you for these stories that give us something to reflect upon of your past concern for your people and the power with which you dealt with their needs. And so we are confident that you are concerned for your people now, and that you have the power to deal with whatever problems we have. So we continue to commit ourselves to you and ask for your leading in Jesus' name. Amen.